those are. Kevin is a longtime anti-war LGBTQ activist, has been active in anti-racist campaigns. He was a founder member of Britain's huge Stop the War coalition, which, unlike the anti-war movement here, is going strong, and very happy to hear about that. Kevin is going to be hosting, I should say, he's going to be talking about the issue of Palestine. And you might ask, why is an LGBT organization like the Gay Liberation Network doing something on Palestine? And there's a few different reasons. First and foremost, the Israeli government and its allies in the United States have been trying to leverage Israel's alleged greater tolerance of LGBTs than other countries, so as to divert attention from the horrible, horrible oppression of Palestinians. And we're going to be going into that because there's been a huge blackout of a series of events recently going on in particularly the Gaza Strip, that we'll be talking about a little bit later. But the other is a basic reason of justice, because if we as LGBT people are not concerned about justice movements for others, then we are not deserving of it for ourselves. And in many years, we in the Gay Liberation Network and many other organizations in this country have fought against the religious rights attempt to turn this country into a Christian nation, a theocracy of various sorts. And that's exactly what you've got in Israel. It calls itself a Jewish nation, and as we saw here in this country, you cannot have a true democracy that's defined by religion, because anyone who's not part of that religion is by definition a second-class citizen. And that's precisely what has happened in, shall we say, Greater Israel, the occupied territories, as well as the 1948 borders of Israel, where Palestinians make up approximately half of the population, and yet they're true second-class citizens. So, Kevin, you've been a long-time activist involved in Palestinian freedom. Tell us about some of the activities that you were involved in around 2010 and so forth, and why you did them.
Well, 2009 was, some may remember, a major assault by the State of Israel on the people of Gaza. A siege had been implemented in 2006, and Operation Cast Lead, which resulted in the deaths of 1,400 Palestinians in Gaza, took place in 08-09. And there was an international response, huge demonstrations in London, several demonstrations of around 100,000 people. And we wanted to do something which was beyond simply demonstrating. Don't get me wrong, the demonstrations are very important. People see them in Palestine. That's important in itself. And we launched a convoy, an aid convoy, called the Viva Palestina Aid Convoy, from London down through France, Spain, into Morocco and across North Africa to try to break the siege on Gaza. So the aim was to deliver material aid, medical aid and so on, but it was also to raise the question of the siege, that the siege should be broken.
The siege which continues to this day.
That's right. And and in particular it raised the banner of Palestine throughout all of those Arab countries, Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, Libya, Egypt. And we did a succession of those convoys, and that led to, in 2010, the development of a flotilla of ships to go to Gaza. There'd already been individual ships, one or two that had broken through the siege in the course of 2006, 7 and 8, but this was a major flotilla, so there was a large passenger ship, the Mavi Marmara. This was attacked by the Israeli security forces.
And you were aboard that ship.
That's right, I was aboard. We were still in international waters. The Israeli commandos from the air and from the sea boarded the ship. As they were boarding the ship, they opened fire. One man was shot dead about a metre in front of me. Another man, about 50 centimetres to the back, right of me, was also shot dead. 10 people were killed in all, 9 immediately, 1 died later of his injuries, and many other people were injured. And that was something of a turning point. It was condemned not simply by people who already had an understanding of the Palestinian situation, but more broadly by the UN Human Rights Council and so on. And so that's what happened in 2010.
Okay, and just a little bit, we're going to be getting on to what's going on today. I'd ask you to hold your calls for now. We want to get into a few announcements. When we are ready to take calls, there is that telephone number at the bottom of your screen. You can call in and make a question or comment. But first, wanted to get some information up on your screen here about some stuff that is going on in the city that Kevin will be speaking at. And the first thing is tomorrow at 2:30 p.m. At the Logan Square branch of the Chicago Public Library, the rise of the European far right and the left's responses. Kevin will be talking about that tomorrow at the Fullerton branch over there in Logan Square, 2:30 p.m. tomorrow. We'll get that announcement up on your screen a little bit. He's also going to be speaking, though, on Monday at an event hosted by the Gay Liberation Network at the Broadway United Methodist Church, 3338 North Broadway. Why LGBTQs and everyone should support Palestinian rights. And you can see that in some of these graphics. This first one here showing how the Palestinians have been confined to less and less land here, even though they're about half of the population. This is the so-called apartheid wall, segregation, official segregation in Israel. And we know what segregation meant to this country. It's a bomber dropping bombs on Gaza a few years ago. Palestinian children, many Palestinian children held by the Israeli authorities, often without charges or trial. So check out that meeting again next Monday, 7 p.m. at the Broadway United Methodist Church, 3338 North Broadway. So Kevin, tell us a little bit about what's going on today. What's going on in Gaza right today that is being blanked out on your television screens. And we're going to get some graphics up here in a few minutes, and I strongly encourage you to check these out because this has not been seen on U.S. television. These graphics, these pictures we're about to show you have been totally blanked out by the major U.S. media. It takes a small outfit. Those of us here on Chicago Access Network Television show these pictures, but tell people what's been going on in the last few weeks, Kevin.
Well, this year is the 70th anniversary of what Palestinians call the Nakba, the catastrophe. The creation of the State of Israel led to its immediate expansion and 750,000, 800,000 Palestinians driven off the land. Since March the 30th is what's called Land Day. And from then all the way through to this week, there have been protests in Gaza up to the fence which separates it off from Israel-Palestine, peaceful protests, mass civil action to demand the right to return to their homeland.
And it should be noted that there are 1.9 Palestinians living in this tiny confined area called the Gaza Strip, one of the most densely populated areas. Of that 1.9, 1.3 million of those folks used to live in Israel or descendants of those who lived within the 48 borders. And so most of the population of Gaza wants to return to their homes within the 48 borders.
That's right, and so this has been what's called the Great March of Return, taking place every Friday. And on the first day of the march, Israeli soldiers who'd been sent there in advance with orders to do this, opened fire, live fire. There's no reports at all of fire being given in return. And have done that repeatedly every Friday since, and we've seen upwards of 50 Palestinians killed, many thousands wounded, many of them seriously, many amputations, children killed, women killed, and so on. And you often hear from people, why don't the Palestinians engage in Gandhi style tactics. Well, this is a Gandhian style,
And they've tried it many times over the decades.
They've tried it before. They've tried it. What was called the First Intifada in the late 1980s was a peaceful civic uprising of protest, which would be recognised in its tactics from the southern states of the United States in the 1960s.
And it should be noted that it's Israeli sharpshooters using telescopic lenses and so forth that have been shooting people. And as of today, the latest statistics are that 50 people have been killed, including, as those of you can see the screen, unfortunately our Facebook Live can't see this, 50 people, including clearly identified members of the press, have been murdered by Israeli sharpshooters, and over 800, I believe it is, or it was 8,000, I can't remember, I was thinking it may have been 8,000 have been injured by Israeli weapons fire on these nonviolent protests. And in fact, this item you're going to see up here, this is a tweet from the Israeli Defense Force. Those who may not be able to read it on your screen, yesterday we saw 30,000 people at the border. We arrived and prepared with precise reinforcements. Nothing was carried out uncontrolled. Everything was accurate and measured, and we know where every bullet landed. That is from the Israeli Defense Force, admitting that they knew who they were shooting, including presumably that press person, the young child that you saw on your screen. This is an intentional massacre by Israel of Palestinians. And yet these images, such as you saw on the screen there before, have been almost totally blanked out by the U.S. media.
It might well be the case for the US media, but these images have gone around the world, and have also gone around the world via social media. It's quite important to understand Trump may be very pleased with himself in moving the embassy next Monday, Tuesday to Jerusalem. And Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, is extremely pleased about this. But it is in complete contravention of international law, and also in the face of opposition from traditional allies of the United States. So Britain, which normally does, the British government normally does everything that the United States government asks it to, is opposed to this move, as is the European Union and many, many other countries. So although in this country the images that you've just shown are kept off the air of the mainstream media, it's in fact the American position and the Israeli position which in world public opinion is increasingly isolated.
Right. And I should just note before we go further in your program, we are at a point here where you can take your telephone calls if you want to ask Kevin a question or make a brief comment. You can call that number at the bottom of your screen, 312-738-1060. On the issue of Trump, this is something where this guy has been rightfully vilified in this country as a racist against Mexicans, against Central Americans, against immigrants of all sorts, racist against African Americans, obviously. This is no mystery. And yet he has warmly embraced the far right in the United States politics, the so-called right-wing evangelicals, who are notorious anti-Semites, and yet at the same time big supporters of Israel. Trump at the same time is Netanyahu's, the Prime Minister of Israel's closest friend. He has embraced the far right of Israel. And for those people who traditionally saw themselves as supporters of Israel, this represents a real conundrum. This should be a wake-up call. If someone like Donald Trump, who is a vile racist, is embracing someone like Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel, those people, whether they're LGBT or not, who have traditionally embraced anti-racist principles, this should be a wake-up call for you.
If I could add another example from Europe, the most right-wing government in Europe is the government of Hungary. The Prime Minister is a man called Viktor Orban, who is explicitly anti-Semitic. So he ran a recent election campaign, which he made some considerable advances in, which is directed propaganda against Muslim immigrants. But his argument was that Muslim refugees are flooding into Europe through a conspiracy organised by George Soros, Jewish finance, an old anti-Semitic all the old stuff from the Nazi period and indeed slightly before. And yet Viktor Orban was warmly welcomed by Benjamin Netanyahu on his election victory, and he's been invited over to Israel as a great friend of Israel. So what it does show is that the idea of support for Israel has nothing to do with
fighting
opposition
anti-Semitism.
to anti-Semitism.
Right,
And in fact, some of the loudest voices on both sides of the Atlantic now supporting Israel are doing so on the racist basis of exclusion of Arabs and Muslims, and amongst those forces are people who themselves are anti-Semitic. Because of course, you can quite the British politician who signed the document to create an exclusively Jewish state was himself an anti-Semite.
Right.
He wanted the
Balfour.
Jews, Balfour.
Yeah,
He wanted Jewish people out of London, out of Britain,
Right.
and into the Middle East, serving a purpose of divide and rule
And segregation.
And segregation.
Segregation, which is got a nasty history, obviously, in this country. You touched on something I think that is important. I mean, right now, there is a genuine fear of war against Iran. And I think it's important to note that Israel has been one of the biggest proponents of worsening relations between the United States and Iran. Israel has been lobbying very hard for this. And what no one points out is that for all the talk about alleged Iranian nuclear weapons, where is their program, whatever, Israel has had hundreds of nuclear weapons for decades with the technology arguably provided by the United States, and is a non-signer to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Every single criterion which the United States has used, at least vis-a-vis nuclear weapons, to isolate Iran, should apply to Israel. And yet, of course, it's a double standard.
UN nuclear weapons inspectors are in and out of Iran all the time on unannounced inspections. They've found nothing. In fact, the opposite. They've said that Iran is in full compliance with the agreement that signed under Obama in 2015. They're not allowed into Israel because, as you say,
They're not a signer.
It's not a signer to the.
We do have a caller here. Kevin would like to get them in here. Did we lose them?
Good evening, gentlemen. How you doing tonight?
Just fine. How are you?
I'm okay. The gentleman to the left of you, are you a European? Are you from Europe? Where are you from, sir?
I am from Europe. I was born and brought up in Britain. I now live mainly in Athens, in Greece.
Oh, I see. Let me ask you a question about in the other countries with gay people and the Muslims. They don't care for them too much. They do some pretty nasty things to them over there, I must say, yes?
Often that's the case, yes.
Yes, they don't accept them like they do pretty much here in the United States, do they?
That's a pretty recent thing here in the United States.
The lesson that we should draw from that is that the movements which created a space for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender people in the United States and in Britain are the movements that we need to see globally. They're certainly not something, the position of gay people in Britain or Greece or the United States is not something which is constitutive of these societies. I mean, we all remember how people were treated and continue to be treated
in our lifetimes. It was actually movements that made those differences, and a lot of the laws that you see.
Right, I'd like to make another compliment.
Okay, make it very brief because we don't have a lot of time, ma'am.
To the guy to the right of you, yes, sir, the guy with the black T-shirt.
Yes,
you ought to be grateful to be in this United States. Our gays have got a lot of rights. We've came a long way out of the closet. You ought to be grateful to be in the United States.
Well, ma'am, I can't say that I'm grateful to the United States. I'm grateful to the movements that came before me that created this space, and I am proud to say that I took part in the movements during my lifetime to force our government, both parties, to grant those rights. They were not given to us by this government out of the kindness of its heart. We had to fight for these rights, just as people around the world have to. And when you talk about, for example, the difficulties that LGBTs have in countries such as Egypt, for example, a lot of those difficulties can be traced right back to the United States government, which supported a whole series of dictators in Egypt, as they do with Saudi Arabia today. One of the most anti-gay,
probably the best example.
And you got Trump and Obama before him, and the president before him embracing that.
And you now have the closest ally Right. For the United States in the Middle East next to Israel is Saudi Arabia.
Right.
And the closest ally in the Middle East for Israel is Saudi Arabia. A young woman who was gang raped, a citizen of the neighbouring UAE, has received 90 lashes. Not the rapists,
Well, and-
90 lashes.
And Saudi Arabia itself has beheaded gays and others. Saudi Arabia, under the Obama administration, invaded Bahrain when it had a democracy
That's right.
movement, and
And
is
so
now
if
bombing Yemen.
if the United States government really cared about gay rights around the world, it would cut off relations with Saudi Arabia. And the movements that here brought some advance, particularly in the legal field, legal equality. There's much else to be won, by the way.
Absolutely,
But
absolutely.
brought some advance, are movements, the kind of movements which are developing in the continent of Africa and throughout the Middle East. So there's friends of mine run a LGBT organisation called Helem in Lebanon.
Lebanon, yeah.
There are 3 queer organisations in Palestine. Those organisations say that the fight for the liberation of LGBTs can only take place with the freedom
context.
from oppression,
Yeah.
with the freedom to live in our own home.
Well, and that's what happened in the history of South Africa, where
That's right.
fortunately LGBTs were part of the anti-apartheid struggle. They did not see themselves as separate from it.
Yeah.
And so South Africa became the first country in the world to have LGBT rights enshrined in its constitution. And that's because people didn't take a gay rights only approach. They saw the broader spectrum. They had to be involved in all struggles for liberation, not just LGBT.
The director of one Palestinian queer organisation puts it very well about the very limited space inside Israel for Jewish LGBT people. She says, when I'm at a checkpoint, it doesn't make much difference to me what the sexuality is of the person pointing a gun at my head.
Right, right. And that's the point. You're talking about half of the population. We've got time for a very brief call here. We'll try and get you in here. I don't know if we lost that caller. Maybe we did.
I'm here.
Hello.
Oh, okay.
I'm here.
Hello.
Hi, good evening, gentlemen. Good evening.
Good evening. You have to be very quick because we're at the tail end of the show here, okay?
I was just wondering what your thoughts were on the announcement of Lori Lightfoot, the first openly gay woman running for the city of Chicago mayor. I was just wondering what your thoughts were on that.
Well, I can't say that I know. I know who you're talking about, Lori Lightfoot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have battled against Lori Lightfoot for literally decades because she has served as a front for police brutality in this town going back to the John Burge area. Now, that's not what we're talking about tonight. We're talking about LGBT supporting Palestine and so forth, but that's probably a great topic for our next show because I think Lori Lightfoot is trying to trade on her sexual orientation with a certain segment of the population, and just because you have relations with the same sex or are differently gendered or what have you does not make you an ally of the 99%, whether you're LGBT or not, because Lori Lightfoot has got a long history of fronting for some very, very vile police officers who beat up black people, who beat up LGBT people and others. So that's my 10-second answer on that. But we are talking about Palestine tonight. Kevin, just a few minutes left. Give us some closing thoughts about what people can do and what people can do to spread the word and support Palestinian freedom.
The first thing to do is to inform yourself. If it's not on the TV, it's available through social media. Find out what's going on. Make sure your friends find out what's going on.
Do you have some good webs? I know that Electronic Intifada is
Electronic
great.
Intifada is a fantastic website.
Yeah.
And it's based in Chicago as well.
Right.
Secondly, look out for the meetings, the solidarity meetings. Thirdly, answer the arguments. If people say, but aren't all of these Palestinians, these Muslims, aren't they
Just
all
a bunch of
crazy
terrorists,
and so on?
yeah.
Don't let it pass.
Right.
Say, even if you just say, look, there's got to be two sides to this. right? Even if you say there's got to be their point of view, and let me tell you what their point of view is. Even if that's all you do, that's something which helps to redress the balance.
Well, as Malcolm X said, the violence of the oppressor can't be made akin to the violence of the oppressed.
Absolutely.
The slaveholder and the slave.
Absolutely.
Both may use violence. Sometimes they don't, but you can't equate the two.
Absolutely.
So anyway, we're going to wrap this up here with a few quick announcements. Kevin is going to be appearing at a couple of meetings coming up here, and we encourage you to check these out, putting them up on your screen here. First, he's going to be speaking tomorrow on the rise of the European far right and the left's responses. This is a great meeting that's hosted by the Open University, the left, and it's going to be at 2:30 p.m. tomorrow, May 12th, Chicago Public Library, the Logan Square branch at 3030 West Fullerton Avenue. And then on Monday night, a program that's going to be sponsored by the Gay Liberation Network, Why LGBTQs and Everyone Should Support Palestinian Rights. That's going to be 7 p.m. on Monday at the Broadway United Methodist Church, 3338 North Broadway Avenue. It's definitely something to check out because with Trump's embrace of far-right forces in Israel, we already know he's a racist here. Our argument is he is a racist against Palestinians, and he's embracing the racist state of Israel. So please, if you've got questions about what Israel is all about, come meet Kevin in person on Monday night, May 14th, at the Broadway United Methodist Church at 3338 North Broadway here in Chicago. And with that, we want to thank all those who made tonight's show possible.